Hey everyone, and welcome to the GRC Room for 5 Questions. I'm Mike Andrews here once again with Karina Klever, and we're happy to welcome Jon Olson, who's the Chief Legal Officer at Blackbaud. How are you doing today, Jon?
I'm doing great, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Karina. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, glad you're here with us. So without further ado, let me pass it to Karina for a brief intro and the first question.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. Jon, really appreciate you being here with us. I'm Karina Klever, founder of Klever Compliance. We are a tool-agnostic compliance management as a service provider. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Jon the first question. So what do you think about that part of GRC that businesses struggle with the most?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I guess each business struggles with it in its own way. But I think one of the key things is to realize that it's not a matter of when, as they say. It really is a matter, not a matter of if rather, but rather when you'll be hacked or when you will have an incident. Obviously, you don't know how large the incident is going to be. You don't know what vector it's going to come from, and you don't know how much it will impact your business. But understanding that reality behind it and operationalizing that accountability is so critical. And that's what I see companies struggling with. I mean, most every company has policies or some sort of embryonic set of rules or guidelines or an incident response program, but have they really developed a situation where there's clear accountability, where there's ownership, where it's not just a matter of checking the box? I mean, we felt that we were very prepared at Blackbaud. We had an incident in 2020, a ransomware incident, and we did all the right things. We had policies, we had the tabletop exercises, but you have to really prepare yourself for the reality, the fog of war that envelops you at the time of the incident, and really understand that those chains of communication really need to be built ahead of time rather than the heat of battle.
That's a really great point. The internal coordination, I always, when the SEC came out with the 4-day requirement for incident management, all I would tell people is go drill it, because what was happening is we were getting a lot of whistleblowers from the teams who saw those incidents firsthand, and they know full well something drops into legal, and if you're lucky, you'll see it in about 45 days come out the other end, right?
Yeah, sure.
So with a 4-day requirement and some sort of code words wrapped around it, one of the best things to do is to drill that worst case scenario, your internal communication templates, external communication templates. And I mean, this was very close to home last year during the LA wildfires, but really doing a checkbox compliance tabletop exercise versus a real life scenario drill can be a very different result.
Yeah, very much, and to prepare for the emotions too, because for us, we were fortunate in one sense. In 2020, we didn't have at that time the 4-day requirement for the SEC. We've now built that into our entire program, and we have a very well-developed disclosure committee and cyber subcommittee for disclosure. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened had we had that 4-day deadline, because things were moving so rapidly on the one hand with the developments, but on the other hand, it took us a long time to develop a consensus about what we wanted to say. So it's so important to do that ahead of time. I think that's really what folks struggle with, I think.
Yeah, well said. If you're thinking not if but when, you'll either be prepared when it really happens, or worst case, you're just prepared for anything and things went well.
Exactly.
So along with this question, Jon, the second question is, what's one data breach that stood out to you the most and why?
Well, of course, obviously, I'd have to say the one that I worked on, right? So just to give a little bit of background about that, we were hacked in 2020. We had a ransomware attack, and the legal aftermath of that lasted 5 years. I mean, we had investigations by various public entities, including the attorneys general and some federal agencies, some international agencies, and of course the obligatory class action lawsuit. So I remember that very well, but I think one that I think is important to mention to folks. So I'm going to go outside of the Blackbaud, and one that has come up more recently and has really stood out to me, and I use it as an example a lot when I speak, and that's the Jaguar Land Rover breach over in the UK. And I'll tell you why. It wasn't a dramatic breach in and of itself. It was it wasn't some dramatic ransomware, type of thing, but it really damaged the operations of Jaguar Land Rover. And it created it had a whole set of ripple effects. So not only did it shut down the production line, it also exposed the just-in-time vendor relationships they had, the vendor fragility. It also created a liquidity crisis because a lot of the vendors that worked for Jaguar Land Rover only supplied the Jaguar Land Rover, so they were highly dependent on that. And I mean, just to give you an order of magnitude, I believe they shut down, some facilities were shut down for the better part of 2 months. Workers were told not to come in. There's thousands of suppliers that supply to Jaguar Land Rover, and some were pushed to the brink because of the cash flow issues. So Jaguar had to advance cash payments, and then ultimately it had to be guaranteed by the UK government. So it had a mammoth financial impact, and that's beyond the IT costs. So I use that as a cautionary tale in many of the discussions I have and the speeches I give on this topic, because it shows that how the tentacles of a breach can reach everything, even in your whole ecosystem, even outside the company, even to a place of public notoriety where they had to go to the UK and get loans guaranteed. So, that's rather dramatic, but it's also very real. And so that one stands out to me in particular.
That's a horrible one because we see the fragility of vendor management here, right? And when we realize that the control of what our vendors do really stops with the contract that we have with them, the end. Mm-hmm. So when they take your data and they pass it downstream, and when that vendor takes your data, now one removed, and passes it downstream, what ends up happening is there's an enormous amount of replication of all of these data types, and the controls, when we're using that common language, within lawful something or other breach notifications, and there's really no commitment. I mean, I love seeing we have an engagement using NIS2, NIS, the number 2, the European directive, right, that has very specific incident management requirements, not when we feel like it. When we feel like it's no, I've had a breach, and the very strong supply chain requirements and the very strong risk management requirements, just really a lot to be learned from that, because I think we can all strengthen our posture from that.
Yeah, without doubt. So very true.
So next question is, what is the most impactful GRC-related advice that you have ever received?
Yeah, I heard this from one of our CISOs that used to work at Blackbaud, but I think it was a quote that came from John Wooden, the basketball coach. And it's basically, this is a paraphrase, I'm sure, but as you practice, so will you play. And so I think the lesson from that quote is that it's really important to not just prepare in terms of having incident response plans and documents around it, although that's obviously a necessary first step, but really drill, really practice, like like in football, the full pads practice, not just where you touch the players and go and run the plays. One where you really have as much as possible in the context of a simulation, some real contact. And so first of all, I've seen in tabletop, and by the way, we had them at Blackbaud, and we did them very well. We were very thorough about them prior to our incident. But in looking at that, what are some pieces of advice, things to do differently? Well, one, talk about the controversial things during the tabletops rather than in the heat of the moment. So one example is, are you the type of company that pays ransomware? That's almost a philosophical debate. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've run into people that have deep feelings about it. And it's better to hash out those feelings about whether you would or wouldn't pay ransomware and under what context, when it's a nice, cool, detached moment during the tabletop exercise, rather than when you're talking to the board members for the very first time. Likewise, a lot of times I've seen in tabletop exercises, there'll be a portion of the event that will say, and here's where marketing will write a press release. I would say those tabletop exercises, to be fully robust, ought to have marketing write out that press release, at least as much as is reasonably possible in the context of a simulation. And in doing that, it will expose some assumptions and tendencies. So for instance, how do you communicate to your constituents, be they customers or other stakeholders, in the absence of complete information? There's always that tendency to want to have one press release that resolves everything and then it's done, never heard from again. that's not really realistic. It's usually more a serialized novel as these things go. I mean, as you know, in your line of work, these breaches, they twist and turn. At the same time, the communications cadence is runs at a different pace than the twisting and turning. So how do you deal with that? So I would say, as you practice, so shall you play. So make sure the practices are frequent. Make sure they include all the players. And I recognize board members sometimes are hard to get a hold of, and so you may have to modify a tabletop or give them a portion of it, but they should be involved too. And then also with that, make it as realistic and full as completely possible. Some of the ones will actually simulate real time rather than doing it in a compressed time frame. And there's a lot of varieties of doing it, but I think anything like that will help the preparedness.
So really quickly, one thing I want to add from a technical perspective is some of the phone calls that we got during the wildfires were absolutely panicked technicians screaming into the phone saying, I'm reading this document and it says frequently. Do this thing frequently. And they're calling and they're like, is that 5 minutes or can I do this next week? Because I think my house is on fire and I can't find my wife and kids.
Yeah, I know.
That is the one thing that you want to make sure has no ambiguity. Those checkbox compliance ethereal words that say frequently, periodically, sometimes, occasionally, get rid of them. Get rid of those words because they're going to do more harm than good.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Very good point.
That's a good answer there. For the fourth question, what is it that you do differently that allows you to excel in this field?
Yeah, for me, I think it's creating an intersection between law, which of course is my day job, but also a law applied to business. And the one thing I found is the human dynamics, the emotional element of these type of incidences are so fundamental. So integrating the law and business, and then focusing on human dynamics, the stress, the communications, the decision bottlenecks, makes a full solution.
That's a great point. Okay. So quick question, the last question is, what is the one top thing that you think a business can do today to strengthen their GRC posture?
Well, this is a great question, Karina, and it riffs off the earlier answer that I gave, and that is run a real breach simulation with the right decision makers in the room. If you have to only do one thing this quarter or this month, run a serious tabletop exercise. It'll expose gaps. Better yet, it creates muscle memory. It aligns leadership before the crisis. And it's the fastest way to convert the governance, risk, and compliance from paper to reality.
And I recommend one of those tabletops be one of your critical supply chain partners is unavailable. We recently ran one that was focused on third parties, and I found that very useful because when third parties are involved, and I read the statistics, and I think over half the breaches originate from or are involved with third parties. It's a whole communication cloud that you're not always hooked into. So it's that extra degree of difficulty. So I think you're right. Especially if you have siloed departments. If procurement doesn't talk to legal, that doesn't talk to finance, and they don't talk to IT, it becomes problematic. All right, close us up, Mike.
Yeah, that was really good answers, John, and we appreciate you bringing your real world expertise here, and you even brought up another good example of a breach from overseas that was super insightful. So thanks so much. Where can people find you if they want to connect?
Sure, if they want to connect, and I am happy to share any of my experiences with folks that are interested in this. I feel we went through it, so I'd like to help people get through it or maybe avoid the same things that I went through. So the best way to reach out to me, I'm on the website at Blackbaud, and it's Jon.Olson at Blackbaud, BLACKBAUD.com. And I thank you both, Mike and Karina, very much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Yep. Thanks so much, John. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks.
Bye.